We don't mix.
You have enough equipment here?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah. So, how to, yes.
Is it live now?
Yes, it is live now.
Okay.
Do you usually do have the link?
No, it's not me. I'm here.
Okay. Someone you know.
So I just got a call from somebody who was trying to get on and they were having trouble.
Oh, got it.
So,
Is it open for everybody? Yes, it is open for everybody. If they use the link that Ellen sent out. Ask her to check the link that went out in the newsletter. Yeah. For this year.
all
For
right.
this month, yeah. It's different every month.
Try to call it back.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Hello everybody, welcome to our last meeting of the year. I'm Diane Grant, I'm the current president, and we have a number of board members that are here as well. And I have some announcements to make. Well, September will be our next meeting. Yeah. So we do have more meetings this year. Yeah. I always think of the year as going from September to. Yeah. I'll try to. Hello? And so thank you. So we meet again in September, but during the summer, we are very busy, and I would like for Sharon Blickenstaff, who's our board member in charge of plein air, can sit down and tell you what's going on with plein air right now.
Is it working?
Yes.
We started our summer 2025 plein air last Tuesday. This Tuesday, today was our second meeting, and it rained and it was cloudy, but that's May for you. So we're going to go until the middle of October. There's a calendar on the website that you can see where we are every Tuesday. We meet from 9 to 12, and then we have a little lunch if you choose to bring your lunch. It's a great group. If you're not interested in plein air, if you know anybody else who would like to to partake, just give them my name and I'm on the website. They can email me and say, hey, I want to be on your email list. And I'll put them on. And that's it. Winter Punter was a resounding success. And we're going to do that again next year.
Thank you, Sharon. Now, Gil McKinstry is our newsletter editor, and we are in the middle of making a few changes. And Gil, do you have anything to say about newsletter?
No, I really don't have anything to say. I hope you all are getting it. If you're a member and you're paid up and you're not getting it on the first of the month, let me know. And that's all I have for now.
Thanks. I want to say the board does do a lot of work to put the newsletter together every month and bring you guys updates and new articles about what's going on with EAFA. So I hope you get it. Goes out on the 1st, as Gil said.
Hi, I'm Mommy, and a couple of things I wanted to say.
Mama, Vice President.
One is that actually guilty. We still have this, it's a long name. Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Art Exhibit is going on at the City of Bellevue, City Hall, which of course is free. You can go in during the week till like 5 or 6 o'clock, I think, every night. And it has a very good collection of the well-known artists, as well as about 10 of local artists. So yes, if you have a chance, you might want to go. Number 2 is about class that EAFA had once already. And I thought about having another one in June, but I could not get that arranged. So just right before now, I spoke with the today's guest photographer, and I was thinking, since everybody takes photos of the art nowadays with the iPhone, and if somebody, if it wasn't him, if somebody can give us some instruction as to how to take picture of our art with our cell phones and tweak with it or change the pixels or something like that. That's hands-on class for 3 hours one Saturday. Would anybody be interested? Want to raise hand? If we were to give one in coming fall. All right, good. I think that's very good. So I hope to put that together.
Thank you, Mom. Mommy's in charge of our classes, as you can tell. There's been a change in exhibits. The exhibit that we thought we had scheduled for Seattle Center in August got canceled. I just want to let everyone know. They lost their lease and they moved out early because they found a new space in Pioneer Square. So I'll be working with them, contacting them to see if there's any possibility of a future exhibit. We do have a couple of changes in our board, and Ellen has been our program coordinator for this year. And Ellen is leaving us because she's going to take full-time classes at EAFA Academy next year. So Ellen, would you describe what is involved in being a program coordinator? And so if anyone is interested in volunteering, please contact me.
Yeah, thank you. There's 2 parts to this job. And honestly, one of them is very fulfilling, and the other one demands some technical expertise. And I haven't even talked to Diana about this, but it is my opinion that we need someone with technical expertise to deal with all the AV, and then it's another job to find speakers ask them to come, follow up with them on what's involved, timing, location, fees, critiques, demos, and I am very fortunate to be in a position where I'm connected with a lot of people at Gage. I know people in the arts community, and I am happy to work with anyone who wants to take on this position to help find speakers. I don't have a problem doing that at all. I may not be able to attend, but I'm happy to help find speakers. And that is a wonderful job. So.
Thank you, Ellen, and we must welcome back Eve Morrell, who was the previous program coordinator, and she's stepping in to help as well to become a permanent program person. And now we have another exhibit announcement. I'm jumping around a little bit, sorry. Charles Fawcett is our treasurer, but he's also running the upcoming online exhibit.
So we decided to have an online show, an open online jury show, back in March. We updated the website, and also the summer coming on, so we decided to call for entries on September 1st, after the summer. It's an open show, big prizes. What's one of the prizes?
Charles.
3,000, 2,000 for the first, 1,000 for the second, and 500 for the third. Being juried by a well-known artist, urban artist, and it can be Dominique. Yes, Dominique. What else? We're advertising the prospectus on the website, probably within a week, and we're putting the show through Call for Entry Cafe, and that the calls at say on September 1st through September 30th, and then it'll be juried and online from November 1st on our website. That's it? Yeah.
Who's it open to?
Open to State of Washington.
The state, the whole state.
Yeah. Residents of the State of Washington. We're hoping to advertise it through the Northwest Broadcast Society in various other.
Thank you, Charles. Membership, Gail.
The judge.
Hi, are there any new members here or relatively new members? Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Jen. I joined it, I think, starting end of last year, so this is my third EAFA meeting, and I knew Alan. Alan actually helped me get connected with the library, and so we're in the same playing program. And I actually just came back from the playing session. I did not see anyone there. So I'm the only one who went to this on the stage. I really enjoyed the playing session, and I just tried to know the organization and the fellow artists. So about myself, yeah, I just started from January. I just retired from Microsoft, so I was a principal scientist in General AI, artificial intelligence, but doing, I think, visual arts is my lifelong passion. So now I could devote all my time to that. So I retired from tech and I'm not with art. So, but they are not conflicting. My whole life is, they are always parallel paths or sometimes across with each other. So, all right, that's all.
Thank you so much. I wanted to say I handed out some of the little forms that I'll pick up at the end of the meeting for speaker topic ideas for next year. Since we haven't got anything scheduled yet for September, we wanted to make sure we got captured all your ideas for what would be great for us to schedule for you here. So if you didn't get one of these, I have them right back there by the card. Okay, then we are actually working really hard on updating our website. the new website format should be up to date, so we got that set up, and we are looking at social media and how to increase our social media presence to invite more members to become part of the organization. So if you have any ideas, we are working with a consultant on that. So I think we're working really hard to bring EAFA along into the current time period and offer a lot of benefits to membership. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to hand this over now to Ellen, who, real quick, 2 things. Receptions, we have 2 receptions coming up, or semi-reception. Ellen is having one at Bellevue Library. She has a current solo show there. And then also at Destinations Linwood, there's a new show going in with Dale Extra-Leven's work. And there's a reception March 22nd. Do you know what time? 2 to 4?
May
2 to 4, May 22nd. And everyone's invited, and it's in Linwood at Destinations. And so that's not mature living facility. 61 plus apartment living. I don't want to say, but it's a really interesting building, and it's a big community with 360 different units in it. So it's huge. And they've invited us to be showing our art there as part of the public art program. That changes every quarter. Roger Baker was in it, and he just took his art down, and then Gail's going up. And they put on the reception every time the art changes out, so all their residents can attend.
Say, when's your,
Thank you, ma'am.
the watercolors?
Oh, yeah. I had a reception, and this is another one, lucky me, because I have painted plein air with the Northwest Watercolor Society for a couple of years.
Hold your microphone. Yeah.
I have painted with the Northwest Watercolor Society plein air group for a couple of years, and they are interested in seeing my show. So they're going to come over to do plein air at the Bellevue Botanical Garden on the 21st. And then they're going to hike on over to the library to see my show. And I've reserved a meeting room so that people can eat their lunch or have a beverage and talk without disturbing the actual library. So that's it. Shall I go on to introduce Tim? Okay. Our last speaker of the year is a photographer. And I'm sorry?
Not of the year.
Well, EAFA's year is the last speaker of EAFA, like a school year.
It's over a year.
A new year will start in September. So, but you're absolutely correct that we're still in the same year. It's still 2025. So, Tim is a photographer and an author, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce him. I have a couple of words. He is the author of this book here that you see, Artistic and Lifelike, Photography in Washington, 1850 to 1900. And just to let you know, I already bought a copy. He'll take cards or cash or a check, and with the Bellevue tax, it's $49.59. And so it's a beautiful book. Tim is a writer, researcher, and photographic enthusiast. He currently spends most of his time engaged in studying the 19th and early 20th century photographers in the American Pacific Northwest. And I would like, before we get started, I would like to announce that he has graciously donated his honorarium back to EAFA. And so he's doing this flags. Thank you, Tim. It's all yours.
you, Owen, and thanks to everybody for coming out today. I know you're busy and you've got art to get back to, so very important, so I appreciate your taking the time to be here. As I mentioned, this is my book, this is the cover of the book, and since I know that most of you are artists, I thought, we'll talk about a picture that's here on the cover of this book. I get the screws. Yeah, I get the screws. And I was so excited when I found this picture at the Jefferson County Historical Society in Port Townsend. This is a self-portrait. James Murray sitting there in the chair, and you may not be able to see, but he. Go back now, start recording. Okay. Across the bottom here, we actually self-titled An Experiment, the Artist Alone in His Studio. And I just thought it was a great encapsulation of everything in 19th century photography. You see him sitting in his chair, he's looking at his pocket watch, probably waiting for a customer to show up. And then everything in there is just typical of an early photography studio. In the background here you see this painted backdrop, and photographers had sometimes a half dozen or more of these different scenes that were put behind portraits of people. There's another over here, ready to be rolled out. And then there's a large window here, the skylight. Here's this big view camera, this little tripod with wheels, and he's taking a copy of this much smaller photograph, going to make it much larger, so you can have a much bigger print made from that. And on the floor, there's a bunch of props, essentially. There's some grass, there's this rug that's sort of misplaced there. Over here, there's a stool, and he's sitting in this one armchair, which was typical for photographers, so somebody could look like they're relaxed and just sitting back. So it's a great encapsulation, as I said, of studios and photography, and I just thought it was a wonderful introduction. So I thought the first question we'd like that people ask is why do I want to learn about 19th century photography? Happened a long time ago. Why is it important? So I've got 3 reasons, which I'll turn through quickly. First of all, I think most people understand this now, but the history of photography, since it happened back in the 1840s, has become the history of our lives. And more often than not, our first introduction to history is through a photograph. And we see these iconic photographs in the past, and then we'll read the story, or we'll watch the news clip, or the moderator or somebody will tell us about them. So it's inescapable, almost. Photography and our lives are connected because we're visual beings, as our just all know. Second reason is that Washington and photography grew up together. We're in the northwest corner of the country. We were one of the last places to be settled. So at the time we got really wonderful artists like Sanford Robinson Difford, the schools from back east came out here. We also photographers who are doing much of the same work. So it's something you'll see in art and photography sort of mirroring each other along the way. And then let me just give you a quick examination of that. This is sort of a timetable of photography as it advanced, and then the related sort of historical mileposts at the bottom. And photography didn't so much go through changes in styles in the first 50 years as it did just in the technology. And here you have the very first, come back here, keep hitting the wrong button, I apologize. Here we have the very first type of photography that's invented, daguerreotype. It was a unique positive on metal plate. So what you see is what you get. You couldn't enlarge them. You couldn't make copies of them. Then a few years later, you get an agrotype, which is very similar to the daguerreotype, but it's on a glass plate. It's still related to small sizes, but it's much quicker to process. Then finally, in the 1860s, you get the very first paper prints that were practical. They're called carte de visites, or CDVs. They're essentially a personal business card. They're about the same size as a business card, and there were millions of these produced. Everything from your relatives, your loved ones, to political people, celebrities, the queen, the king, anybody you can think of. There were these cards which were essentially became trading cards. So it's the very first introduction to having something you could take with you easily and give to somebody else because they think that as many copies of these as you needed. Then you get down here, 10 types in the 1870s, which even though the name says 10, they really are on an iron plate. But they were very durable, very quick to make, and so people began to exchange those, but they were just a little bit too bulky to really travel well to exchange. So by the time you get to the 1880s, you get what we call cabinet cards, which are sort of these carte de visites on steroids. They're about 6 by 8 inches, and they had room for the photographer to advertise on them, and they became the cards that would be displayed in your living room or in your house somewhere. They were like the first sort of images from photography to hang on your wall. And then finally, back in the 1890s, you get to the silver gelatin prints, which most of you are familiar with the story on those. So then you get that sort of history of the technology. And if you look at sort of how that matches up with art movements in the 19th century, you can see there was a fairly big change over the 50 years of the 1850s to the 1890s, when we went from Romanticism to Realism to Impressionism, and then Symbolism and Art Nouveau. But again, photography really didn't change style so much as it just changed technology. Once the technology finally caught up in the 1900s, then we began to see the changes in styles. And so there's one more reason why I think everybody should look at 19th century photography, and some of you may relate to this. And very, very well, that's Rod Stewart, singing this classic song of every picture, that's the story done. And I think that really holds true for 19th century photography. So here's an example. This is an early view from Washington Territory. Make it a little bit larger, but I think it's remarkable for a photograph made in the 1860s, the amount of detailing. You see here this long row of tents going back. There are some soldiers here. In the foreground, there's this fenced-off garden area. Somebody out there working the ground. Over here, there's a man with their spade. And down here, a couple of workers who are resting. In the background, there's a dense forest. And it's just it just tells you so much about what was going on at that time. And especially it tells you more once you find out what it describes. So this is the title for it. Encampment of the Royal Marines north of San Juan Island by the British Royal Navy, 1860. So, anybody here in the story? History, Washington history? Ever heard of the Big War? Okay. Well, this is right after the Big War. These are the British soldiers who were brought in case war actually broke out. The Big War actually was a name given to a minor conflict that never happened. In 1860, when an American settler shot a pig owned by a British settler also on San Juan Island, and the British man demanded payment for his pig, and the American said, "I'm not paying you, it's eating my garden." And there almost really became a war over that conflict. But fortunately, calmer minds prevailed. But this is just an example of, a story being told by the photograph itself. Here's another one. This is just one of my favorites. These are two portraits of the same couple, Christopher Columbus Simmons and his wife, Asenath Ann Kennedy Simmons. They were taken just a few years apart, and here they are. He's probably in this borrowed jacket, quite oversized for him. She's in this nice smock, and here and she stands next to him. And he sits there, still in a kind of a borrowed-looking jacket. But in this case, the story is not in the photographs. The story is what's told about these couples. So I was just so pleased I found this story. So the story is both of these people grew up in a little town named Stoughton, down south of Olympia. It's on the border. One of the first settlements in the Northwest Territory. And these two fell in love. They both grew up there. There was maybe 100 people in town. And they wanted to get married, but her parents said, no, we think you should wait. You're a little too young to get married. So, being young people, they said, oh, well, we'll just float. And so, Christopher borrowed a rowboat from friends and snuck up to a dock and late at night, and Asenath and came down and met him, got in the rowboat, and he rode all night long, came up to Seattle, and went to the home of his uncle, a guy named Doc Maynard, who had operated a nice little bar down in the Pioneer Square area for many years. And they told Doc about their plans. They were to get married. And Doc took a look at her and thought, oh, she does look a bit young. So here's what he told her to do. He said, take 2 pieces of paper, write the number 18 on it, and put them in your shoes. Stay with me now. So the next day, when they went to get married, they stepped in front of the Justice of the Peace. He took a look also at the woman and said, you're a bit young, are you over 18? And said she got the number 18 in his shoes. She answered honestly, yes, I am. And they got married. And you may think that that's just a kind of a family story, something like that, that maybe it's a charming story. But here's the fascinating thing. By the way, she was 14. But they stayed married the rest of their lives, and they're the source of this story. They told this story every single year on their anniversary. Here they are on their 66th wedding anniversary, repeating the same story to a newspaper reporter. So, I don't know. Maybe they made it up. Maybe it's just a great story, but they told it, and I'm trying to say, hey, this is their story. I'm going to go with it. Okay, so another part of understanding photography is what was the report photography. And you've probably seen many scenes like this of these famous old galleries and museums, and there's this crowd of rather well-to-do people there looking at the fine art. So, but if you wanted to have a representation of yourself, if you wanted a portrait, then what were your options for photography? Well, if you were simply wealthy, well-to-do, more than well-to-do, really had money, you could engage a fine portrait painter to show you and your loved one, husband, wife, family, that would hang on the wall of your house. But you had to be really well-to-do to have that done because, one, you had to pay a painter, and more to the point, you had to have the time to pose for painting on a weekly basis. It was oil paints, they didn't dry quickly, you had to come back the next week, or the next week after that. So if you're working class, that was just out the window. So if you were not wealthy but had some money, you could have a painter of, shall we say, lesser skills to do a portrait, start with your family. And then if you had a little bit less money, you could get a silhouette, either cut out of paper or painted in with ink. And then finally, if you didn't have much money at all, you might be able to get a little painted miniature like this, usually made for lockets or a watch chain. And so they were, you can see them, the size are about 2.5, 3 inches, very personal, not a lot of detail in it, but that's what many people had before photography. So, not a surprise when photography came along, the most popular first photographs were about the same size as these little painted miniatures. They were handheld, they were very personal, they weren't something that you would hang on a wall or anything, they were just small. And here's the thing I think is really important when we start talking about the history of photography. So the daguerreotype is imaging. It's on a metal plate with a thin coating of silver iodide over it, and it's very fragile. So the surface could easily be scratched or worn. So all the daguerreotypes and ambrotypes are in these elaborate cases. You can see here there's this beautiful frame around it. There are lots of different styles of frames, and this padding, and then finally this outer, what we call preserver, that puts it all in a case. And you look at the detail here of this man, and he's got this great wavy hair, this really bold bow tie. He's got a sling here, probably from injury, and a nice vest with some detail on it. But it's the thing to understand about this isn't like a photograph like we think of today. Because these are unique images, and because they're protected behind glass, here's what happens. First of all, the detail in these is just amazing. When people say these are just extraordinary. You look at the detail, and they thought they were just absolute truth. You couldn't see anything that would give you more detail than this. But because it's on a metal plate with this highly polished silver, and behind the glass plate, here's what would happen. If you look at it straight on, it looks just like this beautifully. But if you change the angle, suddenly it becomes a negative image, a ghost image, if you will. And then if you change the angle again, you get the reflection in the glass of the person who's looking at the image. So all of a sudden, this is not just a photograph, it's something that people thought was like a magical object. So the very first photographs weren't just a photograph, they were like a totem. They were something that, if you look closely, you would see a ghost to sort of remind you of, the brevity of life, and then you would see your own face in there. Sure, might be this connection. I mean, it's the first 10 years of photography, this is what people saw, no matter what the subject was. So to give you an idea of photography's impact, it wasn't just like, oh, here's a photograph. Here we're giving you a magical object. All right, with that introduction, let's talk about photography in Washington. And I was surprised we came in from the populated areas. First we came north from Portland, then she came around into Puget Sound, and then finally went up the Columbia River by ship. People traveled up into Walla Walla, and then further on to Idaho because there was a gold rush at the time. But I spent a lot of time trying to find, well, what was the very first photograph in Washington? And this is the story behind that. There's this man, William H. James, and he was one of the first photographers in Portland. But he didn't find that much business there, and he decided he wanted to return back east where he came from. So he decided he wanted to go by the Columbia River and stop first at one of the earliest forts in Washington. This one, just north of the city, Fort Vancouver. It looked like this about the time he went there. And we're fortunate that he wrote a diary of all his travels. And I won't ask you to read this, but I did take a couple of excerpts out of it. And he says here, March 5th, 1851, he decided to leave. He talked to the military person in charge there at Fort Vancouver, said he wants to go there to photograph Indians for the purpose of taking daguerreotypes. And He's closed up his business, goes up there, and so we don't hear anything from him. He didn't write anything. But end of the month, just a few weeks later, he goes back to the storehouse server, stored his camera and his photos, only to find somebody broken in and stole the pictures, and sadly, they never reappeared. So, as far as I can tell, and I believe in his claim, this was the very first photograph taken in Washington, but it no longer exists. Now, there were earlier portraits. This one, advertised of a very famous early politician, William Miller, in Olympia. And then this one, I almost fell in my chair when I found this one out, the Silicon Historical Society. This is a paper print made from an earlier advertisement that failed. And I just think it's an astounding image. You have these two young women, the sisters Susan and Margot Downey, and someone, perhaps one of those two women, painted on it. Very simple brush strokes. And there's this little halo around the head up here, the same sort of dots in the dresses down here. There might have been more detail in this cloak. You can vaguely see over here, there might have been a halo over here that's faded away, but just look at those faces, almost angelic faces. These two young girls who had actually traveled by a wagon train out from Kentucky to settle in Stowe's Hill and survived that trip. So, as far as portraits go, I just think this one just is something I could stare at a long time. We all have our own interests. There are a lot of early Washington portraits. In fact, almost all the early photographers made their living by taking portraits. That's what people wanted. They would see themselves, they wanted to see loved ones, they wanted to see other people around the country. These are two very charming pictures. This one of the Fanny Martin. There's her name up here at the top. Somebody wrote in, and she's looking very serious, but she's posing. And this guy on the right here, Ignatius Coleman, he's got these really wonderful eyes. I have a beer with that guy sometime. Just hear what his story is. That's
At that period of time, how long did they have to hold still?
these are 1860s, so probably 2 or 3 seconds. Wasn't very long though.
Okay.
Yeah. And in the first 5 years of the airtime, sometimes the poses were very long, 5 minutes or more. But that quickly evolved and went down. But that's why I think you can capture such detail in these kind of photographs. There he is, giving those piercing eyes. One of the questions I get a lot from people is, why do people smile in this early images? And there are 2 very good reasons for that. I mean, as I mentioned, the earliest photographs were long exposures, so people get full smiles. But there are more important reasons here that we'll talk about just a minute. I'm not sure this guy ever smiled. It really was. But you can see in family portraits and everything, everybody over here looking very glum, just not like they're happy at all. And 2 reasons actually that are somewhat obvious once you think about them, but not so obvious at first is, first of all, in the 19th century, there was really no good dental health care. So a lot of people didn't have very good teeth. You see this probably stage photo here of someone having their teeth pulled, and that's about the extent of dentistry up until around the 1900s. There wasn't any kind of preventative care. Most people didn't brush their teeth, so I'm guessing, and it's just pure speculation, this one here didn't have any teeth left. So that was actually recorded that many people go out and smile, sure they don't have any teeth. And the second reason, there's another family, husband, wife, and 6 children, but and not looking very happy. And this is a reason that just hope you understand why people didn't look happy. First of all, you had the Civil War in the 1860s, an estimated 750,000 people died, either on battlefields or diseases or malnutrition. And other problems were out there regardless before and after the Civil War. And this statistic just took my breath away that up until 1900, an estimated 50%, 50% of all children didn't live beyond their 5th birthday. So there's a lot of reasons for people not to look very happy. Chances are this family might have had more brothers and sisters in there, they might have had more children. But when you combine just the mortality of children in general with the Civil War, people were not very happy. And there was actually a whole mode of photography called post-mortem portraits, where you actually have portraits made of their children or their husband or wife or loved ones. And people want to keep those close because people got served. Yes?
Just wanted to tell you that I'm from Japan, and I've seen some older photographs. They weren't smiling either. So it's not the same history, but I think at the early stage of photograph, I think we were told not to smile.
Right. Absolutely. There's, in addition to these reasons, there were sort of a societal dislike of people looking too happy. I mean, this is even the usually humorous are trying, just saying more angst and that silly grin on the face. People wondering what's he happy about? Why is he looking so good? Now, I say all these things in generalizations. Of course, there are some exceptions. And this gentleman, happy about something, whatever what it was, and he decided he just wanted to be himself. But eventually, after the Civil War, which get into the 1880s and 1890s, things began to loosen up. And you have these two pictures here. One on the left, that's not Emperor of Ireland, it's not the old gunslingers. This was just made in a photo studio. By the time you get to the 1880s, photographers would have trunks full of costumes, clothing to wear. So you could come in and dress up as gunslingers. The one on the right here, one of my favorite little oddities of the 1890s, there's a whole advertising fad called banner ladies. They would stand beside the banner and advertise their business. This was the Golden Rule Bazaar in downtown Seattle. And it had various products tied around the waist. Here she's got a bunch of dolls. There are other ones for people. There's one who had pots and pans, bottles of whiskey, hats, you name it. There are more than 100 of these kind of banner photos advertising the internet. And it just shows that people are lighting up. They're starting to begin to feel like they could be more themselves and have fun in photography. There's a couple more men on the left in his theatrical costume. Maybe he was in a play, or maybe he just found the costumes in the trunk. Like them. And these three sisters on the right, they just look like they're ready to step out into town and have a good time. This is part of the reasons, I guess, they're calling the gay 90s. They're out there in their fineries and their hats and ready to go and have in town. So you might be wondering, okay, how do all these portraits happen? How do they come together? And this is the studio of Stuart Murray, who famous for on my cover here. And this is the studio in Port Townsend. You see, he took ample advantage of the space to advertise photographs and frames and moldings and views. And you might notice that there's this indentation in the roof up here. And that's because here's the other side of that same building. You see there's this large skylight and larger windows here. Because there wasn't any reliable artificial light. Electricity really didn't come into play in Seattle and Washington till around the 1900s, the very earliest. Before that, there were gas lamps, oil lamps, but they were not very even light, so photographers depended a lot on natural light. This is a studio of I.B. Smith in Olympia. You can see again here she's got this very light skylight with drapery over to diffuse the light. And here backdrops, again, painted backdrops, hanging backdrops, a large camera. We believe this is Ida B. Smith herself there in her studio. She might upon her way to take this self-portrait on her own. And here she just got her desk and chair and things that she needs to conduct business. But look over here, this backdrop, look at this little bit of corner down here with this detail on it. Because the next photograph, there's that same backdrop with the detail on it. This wonderful portrait of this Chinese family in Olympia.
Tim, question.
Yes.
Over here. So was it unusual for a woman to have business as a photographer?
There weren't too many that I could find, and none before 1880. So that doesn't mean there weren't some out there. And there were husband and wife teams in which, if you read the fine print or something like that, you see the wife was just as busy in the studio as the husband. Of course, the name never appeared anywhere. But much of the 1890s, there were, I would say, maybe a dozen women photographers around the state. So yeah, there's, and there's some really interesting stories which I don't have time to go into here. So these are, I just picked out 3 portraits of people I thought you could probably see someone who looks a lot like these on the streets of Bellevue, Seattle, or other towns today. And this very confident looking woman on the left, this handsome gentleman in the middle, and this stylish woman on the right. And they all look like, they are dressed for the time, but they still just capture that spirit of individualism that is so wonderful. And I mentioned that people began to collect these cabinet cards, put them in a cabinet, that's where the name came from, you stick them in the glass front cabinet. But they also put them in albums. This is a page from an album of 4 young women. And one of the things I found fascinating is that someone figured out, hey, we've got these albums, these pictures of people, what can we do with it? Well, there it is. Come in, look at my album, women. If you see someone you like, then, I will ask her if she might want to meet you. And if so, then you can meet her really in my studio on a Sunday afternoon. This is 140 years before Match.com. Something else like that, the dating guys were out there. And it all started, this is literally like in 1882. It all started in the 1880s when these albums became out. Yes?
I want to ask a question about the lighting. So if you look at the website, it seems I want to ask a question about the lighting.
Yes.
By that time. So here you look at most of them perhaps as one direction, like the Lumiere one direction. But I think the lady on the bottom left, she's perhaps a little more well lit. And also 2 slides back in your indoor one, I saw a bright circle. So
Oh,
is
yes.
that, they also using some material or mirror, try to have diffuse lighting from the
Exactly. You're exactly right. Yeah, they were various little either round or square circles that were linked to. Let's see if I can go back and find it. Here we go. Like this. Where's everybody? And that's a little diffuser just to keep like if there's a bright spot in somebody's face, or they also bring in, you use this large white backdrop here, and use that to reflect the light back in. So And there was, by the time these kind of portraits came out in the 1880s, there was some retouching that was done. There could have been something done to add more of the backdrop modeling like this woman. This is probably mostly a backdrop that did that, but here you see some lightness and darkness. And again, it probably is more on the backdrop itself. But there's chances are that these might have been slightly manipulated when they were printed, just to get this sort of halo effect around. Is that another question? All right, we'll move on from portraitures to quickly look at some landscape photos. This is a portrait, it's a review of 1881 place called Kellytown, which today we call Cedar Woolley. And this was obviously when it was being built. You see these 3 boys and a man and 2 dogs posing there in the background of this sort of surreal landscape with these tall, burned out trees. And the background is slope further still, fires taking place. See a building here, another building back there, and then the forest. But this is an actual moment in time of what it took to build the towns around our state and clear these dense forests. And quickly talk about just another piece of art. This is a well-known image called American Progress by the name of John Gass. And it is sort of the symbol of clearing forests and making progress in the West. So here you have this draped figure called Columbia, all draped in white, of course. She has her hand telegraph wires moving back to the light of the East here as portrayed by New York City. She's reading out the telegraph wires, trains, wagon trains, stagecoaches. Down here there are farmers, there's miners, and she is in front of her fleeing. There are native people, buffalo, wildlife down here, and all going into the darkness of the West. Because it was uncivilized out here. We didn't have tall buildings and beautiful landscapes and streets. So this picture symbolized what was called manifest destiny, which was a belief that it was people of essentially Christian background were ordained to take Christianity into the West, clear lands for their own use. If there are any people living there, you bring Christianity to them and bring the light of the East into the West. And this helped drive a lot of the early landscape itself and the landscape photography. Here you have switchback of the railroad over the Cascade Mountains. This completely burnt and light, clear-cut landscape there, which today, we might look at that and go, oh, that's pretty bleak. There's another one, a lone cabin. All the trees around it have been cut down. Whole forest has been cut down. And, again, we might think of this is not good forest practice. But at the time, people thought, this is civilization. You're bringing civilization to these areas that are dark and essentially foreboding. The forest itself is foreboding. I love this quote by Carolyn Fairclough, who was an early American author, just saying that trees are there, they stand in the way of civilization. And the very advancement of it seems irreparably connected from the total extirpation of the forest. So people would look at photographs like this in the 19th century and go, oh, they're making wonderful progress. They're bringing civilization to this northwest corner of the country. And of course, all of these trees are cut down. They're being turned into lumber. to build these new towns. So if you're in Colfax, Washington, you see all the way down the street, wooden buildings, there's wooden walkways, there's wooden wagons. So the wood was used everywhere. And in fact, it's not just used here in Washington. These are lumber schooners at Tacoma. Showing all the lumber on the dock that's being loaded up to go up and down the coast. I did some digging into records, and there were hundreds of these kind of ships going down to California, down to Mexico, some went to Peru, some went to Australia, some went to Hong Kong, taking lumber from Washington State around the world to help fuel this growth in the West. Here's another view. This is the wooden buildings. This is Silicon, 1866. And it's a three-plate perspective of what was then the village there. But I love to look at the detail here. In 1866, look at this. Here's every picket in the fence, every shingle, every board on the siding here. See down here the livery stable. It's just a remarkable detail for a photograph taken that early. Probably can't read this one. It says Keach. This is Philip Keach's merchandise store. And this is Mr. Keach's home. Right across from him. And this is Mr. Keach's home today. This house was built in 1857, still standing in Silicon. There's just for the little historical detail in there. To find a building that old and still in such good shape. And here's another wonderful scene. This is Carlton Watkins, very famous photographer from San Francisco. He came up and did a series of views around Puget Sound. This is Port Blakely, and this is the Hall Brothers shipyard in the background. Here's a railroad that goes over to a sawmill to take lumber to build the ships. And these are all cabins where the workers in the sawmill, the shipyard live. And you can see here, there's some people kind of curious about this guy, so this big camera, probably up on this walkway here. We took this photo, and then there's this odd structure here, which was his darkroom. At that time, he was using glass plates. But these had to be developed within a half hour of making exposure. So you have to take a photo, run down there, get out the developing materials, put this glass plate in there, and he used glass plates sometimes 18 by 24 inches. So you would go in there and develop these. This is how a lot of photographers work out in the field. And an interesting story, there's a copy of a letter that he wrote to his wife saying that one day he was in his tent and he told her, as if the elements, the weather, were not enough to worry, a spark from an engine set fire to my tent last week. I burned it half up, and had I not been in there, I would have lost all my equipment. So part of the dangers of being a photographer, this was chancy. Quickly jumping to the other side of the state, this is Spokane Falls, before the city of Spokane was there. And the people here might have seen Spokane Falls sometimes recently. It's still just a gorgeous place. But I want you to squint if you can. Probably you can't see it very well from here. There's a little tiny corner back there. There's a building. It's enlarging of this building. You can see it's just completely out in the woods here. This is in 1880. So 2 years later, here's the same building. A lot of trees are dying from in front of it, but this is Spokane Falls. Figure of a man there, just to get it scale. A couple years later, there's the same building again. Again, there's a bridge that goes across here. And then if you fast forward, this is 10 years later, here's the same building again. And now, in just 10 years' time, Spokane is built up completely around the river. And I just love these snapshots in time that just allow us to see a moment. It's just, probably a tenth of a second looking at the blur of the windows. It just becomes timeless and part of our history, but the artistry of this, whoever was standing probably out on a platform like this, right here, to get the water, get the background. It's just a wonderful, wonderful photo. Jay Haynes was a very prolific photographer who worked all the way from Montana to Seattle and back on traveling in a railroad car that he had specially made. Okay, briefly talk about some photos of Native people, and I want to provide a word of caution because I think these are challenging photos for white people today to look at because there's so much misinformation around them. Here you have this portrait of George Leshai, who was the nephew of famous Chief Leshai, who was a very instrumental Puyallup Native chief who helped people in the Northwest settle. This is 1895, and this is a photo of him just a few years earlier. So you can see by 1882, he had already been completely, what they once called assimilated into Western style. He's wearing a nice jacket, his vest, his hair is cut short, but here he is 3 years later, and we don't know why. Did he ask to be shown in his native garb? Did the photographer say, hey, I want to picture you in your suit, I want to picture you in the cell, I want to picture the native person to sell. But if you look at either one of these photos of himself, one is a nice portrait of a gentleman on the left, or two, here's a somewhat fierce-looking native on the right. They're both the same person. But there are many, many photographs, these made by a man named Yakima, wonderful series of studio portraits. These people in their very finest garb and their everything that's been hand woven. I love this portrait of these two young girls. And it's beautifully decorated bags and cloth and shawls they have on. And there's so many wonderful portraits of Native people in the state that you have to look at them with a bit of caution to make sure what you're told you're seeing is exactly what you're seeing. This is a wonderful portrait of all the African Indians at a train station. It's been hand colored, as you can see with these bright colors. They were all lining up to come to Seattle for the 4th of July in 1900 because they were part of a Wild West show. Wild West shows were a very popular entertainment device in the 1880s, 1890s. You bring in the cowboys and then the Indians and then reenact scenes and battles and then show off how well they can shoot or rope or any number of other things just to entertain the people. But this photo is actually very historical. There are actually 1, 2, 3, 4 Yakima chiefs here in a row every time that they were photographed all together. And they're actually negotiating a fairly good sum to go over there and play the native entertainers or the audiences in Seattle. And to give you an idea of just how important photography was to Native people at that time, this is a portrait of this man, Yakima native, in his own home. And he has this whole photography corner there. You can see there's portraits of probably his relatives, family portraits. There's more down here, stacks of photographs down here, along with other little mementos, things that are important to him. Up here is a whole group of postcards, another fold-out postcard there. So by the 1890s, photography had become integrated into society so strongly that Native people collected money their pictures taken as much as anybody else. And of course, you may know this woman, speaking of wanting their picture taken, this is Princess Angeline, or her native name of Kikasubu, who wandered around Seattle and did laundry and other tasks there. And she was photographed over and over and over again. This is in my book, 2 pages in my book of studio photographs of her, generally with some sort of head covering on, and sometimes not. Sometimes outdoors, mostly indoors. I call her sort of the first meme in Washington photography because she's had dozens of these portraits taken. And the thing is, it's so both captivating and sad is that the city of Seattle, 20 years before these portraits were taken, banned all Duane status from the city. She was one of only maybe a half dozen because of her status. She's Seattle's granddaughter, and she was allowed to stay in the city, whereas all of the rest of her relatives had to live outside of the city somewhere. But she became so popular. There's a cabinet full of Princess Angeline photos. You see the top shelf photos of her. But then down in here, these are China plates with their image on it, cups, more China down here. We get down to cookie bowls with the bottom here with her image on it. Just hundreds of different sort of objects for which she probably didn't get any real payment. And of course, the most famous photo is from the curse of the clam digger. And someone did ask her once, did she like posing for photos? And she, in her own special way, just said, well, it's easier than digging clams.
When did Flash come in the picture? When did Flash lighting?
Flash?
Yeah.
Yeah, flash photography really, it depends. There was some in the sort of 1890s, it was mostly after 1900 that it became not just popular, it became safe. It was not very safe for them because they couldn't accurately predict exactly how much flash power to use. Okay, then wrapping up, we get to the question of the 1890s of what is photography. Of course, 1890s, Kodak introduced the Kodak camera. And with their slogan of, you push the button, we'll do the rest. So suddenly, photography went from these elaborate cameras on tripods and studios to a little handheld device that anybody could take a picture. The very first Kodak cameras produced these round images. You buy a camera, you take 100 round images, then you take the whole camera back to where you bought it. They would develop the prints and put new film in the camera, and you come back in a couple of weeks and get your 100 round pictures and the camera ready to go. So suddenly people kind of went, wait a minute, photography was once this sort of mystical thing. It required all these chemicals and required all this big equipment, and now I can just take my own picture. So what's photography art? And this is the very start of what I call the changing in style photography. These are 1890 photos that start to suddenly look more like paintings. And this wonderfully wind-blown trees here with these sheep looking somewhat like an English landscape photograph, or a painting, I mean. This image over here on the side where you have these wonderful ripples in the water. The photographer even wrote in the name Reflections Lake Washington and took the time to try to make the water lettering there look like the ripples on the water as well. And finally, you begin to see what the main movement of the 1900s was, the early 1900s, which was pictorialism, which was this soft focus image that had made you think, like, what am I looking at? And here you have this image of these footprints in snow leading off into what? Where were they going? Where were they coming from? And this lone little fir tree there coming out through the snow, and made by Minnie Oliver Anderson, was very responsible for bringing sound photography into Washington. So that's a quick story. I'll leave you with this thought. If I not read that, if you can't, I'll read it to you, but otherwise, it's just one of those things that make you go, it is true. We're dealing with time and light as our materials. So this is my book. It's gotten very good reviews. People like it. You can buy it through my website, the site if you'd like, or you can ask your local bookstore. I have a few copies here if anybody's interested, or if you have questions. There's my contact information. If you have more questions, let me know.
Yeah, when did hand coloring, my mother-in-law did hand coloring, I know at least in the 30s. When did hand coloring in the natives stop?
Well, the hand coloring actually developed fairly early on. There were daguerreotypes that were hand colored. There was, some of it was fairly crude, because they weren't the type of
When
medium.
did it end, you know?
It actually went all the way through the 1940s. Even with some of us in the 1950s. So,
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
In the QL, there's a section in on a lot of people who do
Yeah.
watercolor their photographs now.
And the coloring was actually the very first way that a lot of women became involved in photography, because they were employed in studios just to do the background coloring. Because all the coloring had happened after the photograph was developed. And so some studios had 4 or 5, 6 women doing it. Yes?
Yeah, I remember in '63, they came out with direct color. And so a lot of us had our graduation pictures taken from it. But if it was anything kind of light, it would fade off. It would
Yeah.
stay.
Yeah, and the earliest color photographs were not so stable, they would not last so well, and they were reasonably accurate, but if they had gotten something, you just see how it was looking right.
Yeah.
You know, look at them now. Yes.
In Hawaii, where I grew up, we had neighbors who lived right behind us, and they were photographers, and they did hand coloring only. And it was amazing.
Yeah.
I thought it was just awesome.
There's
It's done in reverse. That's what my mother-in-law said. She has to look at it in reverse in her mind to color it.
yeah,
It's
that's
bullshit.
Yeah, that's what they did.
Right, but it's
there's a whole style,
you know what I'm saying, is what I'm saying.
whole style that started in the 1880s called crayon portraits, which actually didn't use crayons at all, they used pastels, which is the name in those days. But they would actually project a photograph onto a canvas, and they would photograph the projection photograph with these pastels. You see, photos look a little odd just because they're essentially almost traced over the original photograph with the pastels, but it worked. Other questions, other thoughts?
So pastel is opaque. I assume it has to be a transparent medium, right? Because it will have the texture of the black and white go through. So it has to be a transparent medium where people
How do they color it?
Oil paint works. I've done it.
Yeah.
And it works.
Yeah, well, if it's on film or if on transparency itself, then there has to be a special medium used for that, and it's maybe you know, I can't remember exactly, but yeah, but most of it was done on prints, so it was essentially about the same as on any other kind of paper.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but it could have been Indian ink.
Thank you, yeah, I think that's probably
few of our members have brought paintings in the back. We're not having any sort of critique, since Tim is a photographer and not oil color or watercolor, oil painting and watercolor. So please feel free to circulate and socialize.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Yeah. No, we don't really need this.
How'd it go? Okay, good. And which laptop do you use? Oh, okay. So it doesn't matter which one?
Amazing.
Cheers.